He killed 7 people because he was obsessed with his female co-worker. He couldn't take no for an answer, so he decided, I have absolutely nothing to lose. Hi friends, welcome back to another true crime episode. I'm Faiza and every week I talk about a true crime story. So if you're interested in true crime, do like and subscribe, and I'm glad you're here. Trigger warning, today's case contains themes of obsession, murder, stalking, so viewers' discretion is advised. So, Laura Black was born in the early 1960s. Her actual date of birth is not known. I couldn't find it anywhere. However, she, had a wonderful childhood. She grew up with her parents and she was described as a very happy, outgoing young woman. She wanted to become a civil engineer, and with that said, she went to university and she graduated with flying colors. She studied computer science and she was just focusing on her career. She wanted to make it big and she was working towards having her dream job, and this is where she starts working for a company called ESL. So she moves from Florida to California to work at this tech company, and when she went there, she literally uprooted all by herself and she was very excited to start her career. With that said, she met all of her co-workers and they were very nice, and this is where she met Richard Farley. So when she meets Richard Farley, she was nice the way she's nice to everyone else. However, he took things the wrong way. They always do. And he just became instantly infatuated by her. He just couldn't stop thinking about her and he became obsessed. It was that quick. So let's talk about Richard. He had a totally different background to Laura. He basically was born in Texas in 1948. He was much older than Laura, at least by a couple of decades. He struggled with mental health issues. I couldn't tell you what they were, but he just seemed to be very closed off. He wasn't very social. He struggled making friends and he was seen as a lonely child, and I quote. He often found comfort in his work and he was the oldest of 6 children. And with that said, he didn't really get along with his siblings. He doesn't have any close relationships. So he spent most of his life alone and working overtime because he didn't have anything else to do with his life. So Richard was the oldest of 6 children and his father was an Air Force mechanic and his mom just stayed at home and raised the children. She raised the siblings and everything was okay. However, Richard's behavior seemed a bit strange. So Richard's family, they settled in a small town called Petaluma, which is 40 miles north of San Francisco. But get this, Richard's brother testifies later in court. I know I'm jumping ahead here, but he testifies saying that he hasn't spoken to Richard in over 10 years. So this is how I mean that the family weren't close. They didn't even stay connected. So in school, Richard was bullied by his classmates. They would call him a wimp. He had no close friends, like I said. And, he became quite withdrawn because of that, because, getting bullied, it does take a toll on a child. So in 1966, Richard attended a community college, but he dropped out and he decided to join the Navy instead. Whilst in the Navy, he trained in computer technology and he received awards for good conduct and marksmanship. The people in the army described him as someone that is quite arrogant and full of himself. He honestly believed that he was so much better than other people, which is so sad, I think we all met somebody like that, where they just think that they are better than you. So in 1989, Richard started working in the same company as Laura, and this is where they first met. He was completely infatuated with her, and it was love at first sight. However, this couldn't be any more creepy, because he set his eyes on her and he was like, yep, I want you and nobody else, and this is going to happen. Richard wasn't being very creepy. He was just being nice, having small conversations with her here and there. However, she just started work and she just wanted to focus on work, And Richard kept coming to her desk, asking her questions. And at one point, he decided to bake bread for her. It was blueberry pie bread or something like that. And she was like, okay, thank you. And she found it very odd, because who bakes bread for a colleague that you've just met? They just started and you're already, you know what I mean. So he kept asking her, oh, this weekend I have some tickets to go to this event. Are you free this Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever? And she was like, no, I'm busy. No, thank you. And then he just kept persisting. He was like, oh, if you're not free on the Saturday, what about Sunday? I know you're not working on the Sunday. And he was just too much. So she got creeped out by him, and then she decided to, reject him over and over again. And then at one point, she had to be very blunt and told him, listen, I am not interested. I'm not going out with you. But it seems like Richard is going through so many different moods throughout the day, throughout each hour, because he'll be very persistent and very desperate. And then other times he will be very arrogant and dismissive towards Laura. So you just don't know what kind of person you would get at that particular day, However, despite Richard getting rejected by Laura, his obsession with her quickly turns dangerous. So this is happening at a rapid rate. Richard's obsession with Laura started almost instantly, and he just couldn't take no for an answer, He was just so adamant, like, this is the woman that I want. And he just thought, if I keep pushing, maybe or eventually she will change her mind and we will be this power couple at the workplace and we would live happily ever after. He's just so delusional. So Richard starts to write letters to Laura. Not 1 or 2 letters. He sent over 200 letters in a 4-year period. He was absolutely out of his mind. And could you imagine, this was in the 80s, but if this happened in modern times, he probably would have texted her, called her all hours of the day and night via social media. He will send these letters to her house. He will send those letters to her work desk. He will just find ways to constantly be in her face, speak to her. It was very overbearing. So Laura felt completely unsafe immediately as soon as she started her dream job. And it's just so frustrating to hear this story because she worked really hard to get into that position and she didn't want to make any complaints. She honestly thought, I can handle him. I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to call HR and burden them with what's happening. She thought she was strong enough to handle this. However, I digress because you need to call for help at any given time, It's okay to ask for help at any given time. So Richard kept coming to her desk every moment that he got, and he would just speak to her like they've been long-term friends, trying to catch up. He wasn't, concentrating on his work, and Laura was distracted. She couldn't catch a break from him because he kept giving her gifts, little trinkets, and he just kept talking and talking and talking. There was no off button with this man. So as the days turned into months, turned into years, Laura had enough and she decided to call for help. She went to the police and she filed a restraining order. And with that said, this tipped Richard over the edge. He was like, a restraining order? I don't like cops around me. I highly recommend that you don't do this. Don't make me do things I will regret or whatever. He was just talking nonsense and warning her at the same time. So the restraining order is filed and this was supposed to protect her. But sadly, it didn't work because Richard said, and I quote, a piece of paper won't stop bullets. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he's absolutely crazy. Despite having a restraining order against him, they were working together. And when the workplace found out that, okay, Laura has filed a restraining order against him, he had to be fired immediately. So now Richard has all of this free time, and what does he do? he still shows up at the workplace. He's still talking to Sarah. He's talking to her like nothing's happened. And he's still trying to ask her out. So as you can imagine, this happened in the 80s, and it shows how weak the laws were back then. There were hardly any anti-stalking laws in place. But Richard kept following Laura around. He was waiting for her to finish work and so on. And he kept telling her, I just want to talk. But at this point, she was at wit's end, and she kept running away from him. She kept ignoring him, and he was just getting so fed up with all of the silence, because he wasn't getting his point across. So Laura finished work at 5 p.m. and she wanted to, fill up her car with petrol. And once she did that, guess who shows up? Richard. He's just talking to her, asking her, I just want to talk. Why are you ignoring me? We're supposed to, work on this relationship. And she is like, what would it take for you to leave me alone? And he just kept going on and on and on. There was no off button with this man. It was overbearing. So as Richard is harassing Laura at the petrol station, he said to her, and I quote, oh, don't worry, I'm gonna take care of this. I'm gonna take care of you, I'm gonna take care of this. And Laura was thinking, what does he mean by that? And I'm gonna tell you exactly what he does. On February 16th, 1990, everything changed. Richard walked into the office where Laura worked. Mind you, he is fired and he's not allowed to be on the premises, Oh my God. But he walks in there carrying a .45 caliber handgun and multiple other guns, and he plans his attack, which is just completely driven by obsession. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Richard finds Laura while she's just, at the workplace working on her computer, and he shoots her multiple times, and he managed to struck her in the shoulder. Alongside, multiple co-workers were shot and killed, 4 to be exact, and a further 7 people were injured, all because she rejected you. She was within her own rights to reject you. He was shooting people at random. He injured multiple people out of nowhere. He shot over 92 bullets into the building. So after the shooting, Richard was caught by police after a short standoff. The whole community was completely shocked about what has happened. This building was very safe, and, the whole area in Sunnyvale, things like that doesn't happen, And they were very heartbroken. People have lost their lives, and they couldn't believe that Richard was responsible for all of this. So Richard was put on trial for murder, and his defense team argued that he was mentally ill and he was trying to, lessen his punishment he wanted to charge him with manslaughter instead of first-degree murder, and that didn't work out for them. But the jury found him guilty in 1992, and he was sentenced to death. With that said, in the state of California, they have abolished the death penalty, so they decided to give him life in prison instead. So Laura did get shot in the shoulder. However, she went to hospital and slowly recovered. It was the most traumatic day of her life, as you can imagine. So Laura's story is an important example of how stalking is dangerous, to say the least, and how you can't have control over other people's, reaction to rejection and so on. She didn't do a thing wrong. However, it was within her right to say no to him, and he just couldn't take no for an answer. And that's how it is with these cases. They just don't know when to leave. So with stalkers, their behavior is all about control, power play, trying to get what they want, and they just want to keep themselves relevant in someone's life. And I just can't understand why cases like this keep popping up, and it just doesn't end. So Laura's story raises questions on safety in workplaces and how people are treated within the workplace, because she did ask for help and they brushed her off at the beginning and they just didn't listen to her. I just want to remind you again that all of this happened in the 80s, and this is just another reminder to really support those that might be in danger, because when someone feels a bit off, that feeling shouldn't be ignored. I mean, I'm a big believer in that, and hopefully women can be much safer in the workforce. After this whole case, Laura decided to stay out of the spotlight. So I was thinking, why didn't Laura speak up sooner? Like, how did all of this get to this point? I honestly do believe that Richard himself he went from 0 to 100 very quickly, and he just was scaring her, you know? And at the same time, she felt like, I don't want to be a victim, and she thought she could handle him. You know, she expected him to behave like a normal human being. We're here now, so I do hope that she is doing much better now. I mean, it's been over 30 years since it happened. I have watched a film based on today's case. It's called Stalking Laura. It was made in 1993. You can find it on YouTube. I'm going to link it down below. It stars the young Brooke Shields, and she did an amazing job at reenacting everything that has happened. However, with that said, this does bring us to the end of today's case. Please do stay safe and hydrated, and I will see you guys all again next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.